everybody. I'm glad everyone has come for this, and I hope you all find the course useful in some way. And as far as I'm concerned, if you attend for 1 week or 2 weeks and go away, that's also fine. I mean, I have no problem with that. And whatever you attend and if it's helpful to you, that's good. Now, what is my scope in this? Well, basically, this is a course from the side of Department of Theoretical Physics. You mean this is also not in the field of view? Not here?
This is it.
Oh, this is. Okay. From the side of Department of Theoretical Physics, so it is a theoretically oriented course. But that hopefully doesn't mean that it will be very formal. I hope that I will make it accessible to everybody. My policy generally is to start from the beginning and go on until it becomes December. So whatever we cover, we'll cover. I can't do more than that. And we'll cover it at a reasonable pace. And if the pace is too fast or too slow, you're supposed to tell me that. Now about textbooks, there's a nice Wikipedia page listing all the major textbooks on general relativity. I'll also link it from my website, which I'll make over the weekend, and it will be announced maybe on Monday. But there are two books that seem quite nice. One is this one by Wald, and one is this one by Hartle. There's also one by Weinberg, which is excellent, but it's somewhat old. I don't even know if it's in print or not. Do people have it? It's in print? Okay. And then there are many other books, obviously. Now, I found something very striking when I opened Weinberg's book the other day. He said, you know, a standard textbook on GR starts by introducing space-time as a manifold and Einstein equations and all that. But he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to teach using principle of equivalence. And many chapters, 10 chapters into the book, I'll introduce Einstein's equations. I'll introduce, not Einstein, he introduces Einstein equations using principle of equivalence, but manifolds, differential geometry, and Einstein-Hilbert action and all those things, he introduces about 10 chapters into the book. Then I opened Hartle's book, this one, and he says, you know, it's too much to introduce manifolds right in the beginning of the book. Most books do that, but I won't do that. So instead of that, he introduces geometry, and he spends like 6 chapters studying solutions of Einstein's equations, but he doesn't tell you what are Einstein's equations. So for those chapters, you're supposed to believe that the space-times are solutions, and then he introduces the equations. So that's fine for him. Also, this is for undergraduates really, this book, at least the first part. But I cannot do that. I have a problem with that. I cannot make people study solutions of things which are equations which I have not written down. So I have to follow a conventional course. Unfortunately, all these books are following this unconventional course. So finally, I found Wald. I think it might have been a slightly older book. And here, to my relief, he starts by introducing space-time metric and geometry, and then goes on. Now, we'll see how it goes. I'll have my own notes, I suppose. If people are in need of notes, by the way, I can do many things, including scan them and put them on the website. So all these things are possible. Anything you want done like that, just let me know. It's not very difficult in this day and age. Okay. Now, as far as background, I suppose I am safe in assuming that people know special theory of relativity. And then I am sure there is a wide variation after that. Some people will be just post. Is there anybody who is in first year post BSc? There are. Okay. Good. So that's part of the distribution. Second year post BSc. Okay. First year post MSc. Very good. And beyond. Okay. And actually, who are the people I'm supposed to be teaching this for? That would be beyond first year and theory group people. So who are these people? You are one of them. The 2 or something. You're not. You're second year. Huh? You are. Okay. Good. So fine. Anyway, I have I don't distinguish on grounds of anything. So I don't discriminate. So we'll simply address it to everybody. Okay. Good. Is there anything I need to answer before I start? Do people have any questions about course sort of outline I should give you? But I'm going to do a very simple thing. I'll be copying it from Wald's book. Okay, and I don't like to be very original about these things. I'll just show you, I'll just list briefly some of the things he does on the board, and that will be the course outline, then we'll see. As far as the procedure of the course, what I always do is to give homeworks at the rate of maybe 4 to 5 for the whole course, one midterm and one final. I think that's what we should do here. Now, in principle, with a very small class, we could have all kind of seminars at the end or things, but I don't know. GR is really a very hands-on subject, so most likely what you will get is an open book. Gravity. There will be some other limit. This is easy to guess, is the limit where gravity is not important. You can always have a theory of gravity and then restrict your attention to very weak fields or very light objects such that the force of gravity itself is not important, but mechanics, maybe electrostatics, electromagnetism is important. So there you get special relativity. And the point is that we are perfectly sure about this theory. There is no doubt about special relativity by the time we come to talk about general relativity. Special relativity is, as you all know, was motivated by the Michelson-Morley experiment showing that speed of light is constant in all inertial frames, in all directions. You can point your apparatus whichever way you like. There is no drift relative to the ether, etc. And then Einstein came along in 1905 and said, okay, let's accept that the speed of light is really constant in all frames and there is no ether. One point that I have often made is that everybody knew there was no ether, in the sense the experiment was saying that, but Einstein was roughly the first person who came and said, okay, let's accept that there is no ether and let's stop going on about it. Because people were sort of trying to beat about the bush in all possible ways that maybe we can save ether in A, B, C or D way. But Einstein said, well, let's dump it since it's not there. Okay, that was a very wise observation, and that led to this theory. And once he proposed this theory, which basically comes from the speed of light being constant in all frames, then it passed all known experimental tests, and it's going on passing all those tests until this day, and we can't live without it. So it's correct. That's why I put a tick over there. Newtonian gravity, of course, applies to falling bodies. It basically is embodied in the relation that m times x double dot is equal to minus m times grav of phi, where phi is some scalar potential, which in special case could be the potential due to another gravitating source, but in general it encapsulates some gravitational field. Okay, so a Newtonian gravitational field, function of the three space coordinates. I differentiate it, so I get a 3 vector, xi double dot is a 3 vector. This is the force as defined as mass into acceleration, and this is the origin of that force due to gravity. Okay, and as you may have heard, but we'll review it again on the next lecture perhaps, this mass is called the inertial mass, and this mass is called the gravitational mass, and a priori they might not have been the same. Okay, what do we mean by saying they might not have been the same? Of course, it wouldn't. If one was always twice the other, it's only a choice of units. The question is that for every object, this one and this one in fixed units are equal. That's the statement that inertial mass is equal to gravitational mass. Okay, so I hope you know this, but if you don't, as I said, we'll start off again in this day on Monday, reviewing what is Newtonian gravity. Perhaps you have learned it, but not in the language which I'm using. Okay, so inertial gravitational. This is an experimental fact, and because they are equal, you can cancel them from this equation, and then we get a nice equation telling us how a particle behaves in a gravitational field. So that's Newton's theory. Everything else is in some sense details of this equation. Okay. As you may have heard, second derivatives of this function in two different directions give you tidal forces and all that. So there's a whole structure, and we will review it. Okay. My point though here is that this equation is also correct. Correct means experimentally tested. Okay. Experimentally tested theories can break down when you take them beyond the limits where they are valid, but they If they are within the limit where they are tested, then of course they are right and we can't do without it. So that's why I've drawn this kind of diagram and ticked that this theory is experimentally tested and this theory is experimentally tested. Okay. Now it must be possible to take a situation where special relativity is important and introduce some mass that's very large and causes a gravitational field. Physically, it's a possible thing to do. That means you are expanding your area of interest from out of this, and what you don't know is what theory will you find when you do that. Okay? The same thing is possible here. We can take a system which has a lot of masses, sun, moon and all that going around each other, and then ask the question, well, hypothetically, Newton's laws are all very well, but hypothetically, let's imagine that we crank up the speeds of everybody until they are very fast, and we crank up the gravitational field till it's very strong, and so on. And by that means, we keep expanding the sphere of this study, which here was limited to some comfortable situation like planetary orbits or something. So as soon as we try to go out of the domain where the theory is best understood, then we'll start to find that the theory can't be right. Why can't it be right? Because it's not compatible with special relativity as it stands. There's no special relativity symmetry, there's no Lorentz invariance of this equation. So something has to go wrong. Okay? The simplest way things could have gone right is that this equation would extend to a Lorentz invariant equation and we'd be home. That's one thing. So let me write this statement here. Extending the domain of Newtonian gravity the laws must be modified since in particular they have no special relativistic behavior. And the question is always that you'd like to modify things as little as possible and have a theory that completely describes everything that you want to describe. But exactly what happens in this case is that when you do this kind of thing, you realize that you are led to change your entire notion about space and time. Now I see people looking a bit puzzled at this picture of a grand theory with little regions, but actually you know it already. Maybe you haven't thought about it in this language. How did quantum mechanics come about? Okay, classical mechanics was fine, so why did we need quantum mechanics? Okay, what was wrong with good old classical mechanics? Well, we extended its domain until we got to very, very microscopic distances. And then at those distances, we found that it's not compatible with physics. Okay, so it has the equations have to be extended to incorporate some new properties. Okay, similarly, for those students who are perhaps a bit more advanced, quantum field theory, the theory which describes the weak and strong interactions and electrodynamics, comes about if I try to extend electromagnetism to incorporate electromagnetism itself is Lorentz invariant, relativistic, but I want it also to be quantum. Okay, if I want it to be both quantum and relativistic, then I get quantum field theory. You can exactly use this diagram, keep relativity in this side. You can keep relativity, or if you like, relativity is fine. And in that side, instead of Newtonian gravity, just put quantum theory. So you have a figure in which quantum theory is valid in some domain, but it's not relativistic. Special relativity is valid in some other domain, but it's not quantum. That is, we are working in the approximation where we don't need quantum theory. Now we get out of the domain where we started, and we need both. So we need a new theory. So the equations have to change. Okay. The problem there also and here also is not enough that the equations change. Here there's a nice differential equation, but as you know, when we go to quantum mechanics, we don't have differential equations of the usual kind. We have instead operators, matrices, vectors in Hilbert space. We have other differential equations, but it's a completely different world. The evolution is not simply following some differential equation like this. It's we have to change the concepts, the objects. So here also, if you are going to go out of this domain of Newton's gravity, it's not at all clear that phi of x, which is the gravitational potential, will survive as the only quantity characterizing gravity. In Newton's theory, it's the only quantity. One quantity tells you what's the gravitational field. It's very satisfying because you know that this equation is very similar to electromagnetism, where also the scalar potential in electrostatics specifies the electric field. Okay, but when you go out of this domain, you realize that there are going to be other quantities, and gravitational field is not simply given by one simple function whose derivative appears in a simple equation. Much, much more complicated than that. So that is my point. Change of notion about space and time, and then a new set of equations for a new set of quantities. But, now there's a but. Once we have a new set of equations for a new set of quantities in a new theory, what's the but? The first thing to do is test that there is a limit of this new theory which reduces to familiar relativity and reduces to familiar Newtonian gravity. Okay, we are trying to extend the theory, but what we get now, what we end up with, better have the original theory as limits. Okay, it's just like when you have quantum field theory, there must be a limit of that which is not quantum, where quantum effects can be neglected and you get ordinary electromagnetism out. Okay, or even in quantum theory, there's a ordinary quantum mechanics, there's a limit where it reduces to classical mechanics. So we should always check that old equation arise in a limit. What limit? That we'll have to define very, very carefully. For that, I'll have to, of course, tell you the new theory. I'll have to develop it. I'll have to show you what parameters it depends on. What are the dimensional constants? What scales do they set? And then, if you take something large relative to something else, maybe energies or masses or fields or something, then the theory will be large or small. Then, accordingly, the theory will reduce to various known limits. Okay. And it's a very important thing about general relativity that it's supposed to be a theory of gravity that's correct in all domains, neglecting quantum mechanics, of course. But really speaking, gravity that we encounter on Earth or gravity that we encounter even in the solar system, by and large, is very weak. We are never really close to some very, very strong source of gravitational field. And for most purposes, things move fairly slowly. And so actually Newtonian's gravity is not wrong after all. Okay, it's just an approximation to the correct theory. So a lot of work is done living very close to that approximate region. That is, imagining that the theory is nearly Newtonian, but what are the deviations from that? Okay. And later we find that there are some phenomena which simply do not have an analog in Newtonian gravity. And those are completely new, those are striking, those might be found somewhere else in the universe, experimentally realized, and they are very, very interesting, but they'll come later. So I think as a crutch, when we do a new theory, we should always stay close to the things we know first, and then try to venture into deeper and deeper topics. Okay, so this is a sort of sketch of my approach to the subject, but I haven't actually told you anything, just given you some very general picture. And what I want to do in the next 15-20 minutes, and then we'll wind up, is to just make you think a little bit about curvature of space, not space-time, and from next time we'll think about space-time. Any questions? No questions. Okay. So now you can forget about all this. And I want you to think about the following situation. You've all studied classical mechanics, I'm sure. And in classical mechanics, I think nothing can be simpler than a free classical non-relativistic mechanics. So a free particle of mass m and coordinates x, I, t, with I being 1 and 3, moving in three-dimensional space. Okay. So what is the equation of motion for this? Could hardly be much simpler. Ma equals 0 because it's free, there is no force. So force is 0. So x double dot is 0, and then of course, as you know, it means that x is constant plus a linear term in time, which is Newton's law. Okay. But this derives from an action or a Lagrangian. Is just a slightly more formal way of saying the same thing. And the Lagrangian, as you all know, is a half m x dot squared. I hope you are quite comfortable with this kind of notation. X dot squared for me means x dot I, summed over I, and dot means d by dt. If there is any symbol or notation I use which you don't understand, please stop me immediately.
So if one contrariant covariant x
yeah, there's no such thing as contravariant.
So you want only 3 states?
Yeah.
Okay.
That I've already said. Okay. Good. So nothing could possibly be simpler than this. Now you know that this contribution in this term is called the kinetic energy, and that we can add another term V of x, and that will be called the potential energy, and n will be t minus v and all that. But there's another way to change this, which is quite interesting and which is not very commonly taught in classical mechanics courses. And that way is to change the kinetic term rather than adding a potential term. Okay? And let's first try to see what we can do, and then let's try to interpret it. So let's try to ask what's the most general. Let's generalize this L. Keeping it quadratic in velocity x dot. So I'll propose the following. I'll keep a constant in front. I'll still call it the mass, and I'll take the velocity x dot I and another velocity x dot j. If I put here delta ij, then I get this Lagrangian. Instead of that, I put an arbitrary function of position, which by convention I label gij. It has two indices. Again, what does this mean? It means that sum over I going from 1 to 3 and independently j going from 1 to 3. So this is my new Lagrangian, and just to be consistent with the old one, I'll still put a half in front. Okay. So gij of x is a generic space dependent function, or a generic function of x. Okay. In physics, when we say generic, we can always get into trouble. For example, somebody can say if it's all that generic is 0 a possibility, of course it's a possibility, then L is 0. So what kind of system is that? No kind of system. So obviously it can be strange enough that we don't want to consider it. So let's say generic means it's general but not too weird. Okay? That's quite enough for this purpose. Later we'll make that statement also more precise. Okay. Now you see, without any, I have not given you any physical motivation for this, just generalized it. But it's a very interesting problem because it leads to an obvious question: what is the equation of motion? So does anybody know what the answer is?
Derivative of g.
You will have some derivative of g in the equation of motion, that's right. But do you know what the equation actually looks like? Have you ever done this?
can't apply the normal calculus of radiation?
Absolutely. Euler-Lagrange equation. So you vary x. So the equation of motion is d by dt of dl by dx dot I minus dl by dxi equals 0. This term, at least in the usual case, gives me x double dot, and this gives me nothing because in the usual case there is no x dependence. But in this case there is an x dependence, as well as this term is more complicated. So there is an equation. I am not going to write it for you now. I will leave you to, why don't I write it for you? Let me write down the answer for you now, but I will leave you to check that. Okay. So this gives me x double dot I plus gamma I j k, which I will define, of x dot j x dot k equals 0. As the Euler-Lagrange equation from that action. Okay. Now this doesn't make any sense till I tell you what's gamma. Gamma is a function. Somebody said derivatives of g will be involved. That's correct. But gamma is a rather complicated function of g and derivatives of g. So I'll write it for you here. It's a half g I L. I still have many things to explain. What is comma? Comma is derivative with respect to x. So g L j comma k just means d by d of x k of g L j. Okay. If you are going to differentiate it in x k, we put a comma and put the k after it. It's just notation. Okay. You see that there are lots of indices here, and there are different ways to sprinkle the indices into this formula. So the particular way which is correct is this plus this minus that. Okay. Still, I haven't told you what is G upper IL. G upper IL is the matrix inverse of G lower IJ. So it satisfies that GIL GLJ is delta I. This is the matrix inverse. After all, Gij has two indices, so it's a matrix. It's a matrix, 3 by 3 matrix. So here we already see that to have any physical sense in this problem, it should be an invertible matrix. So we'll agree that it's invertible, and then this is the matrix inverse. Now, by now I might have lost half of you because you are asking, why am I doing it and why did I get such a complicated answer? Now, the second part I can't help you with because this complicated answer is the Euler-Lagrange equation of that Lagrangian. So if we agreed to study that Lagrangian, then we have to agree to study this equation. It's the result. Okay?
That is d by dx, so partial derivative of 2.
That really is a matter of, there's partial derivative. You know, when something is a function of many variables, in this case 3 variables, it really doesn't matter what you call the derivative. There's only one way to differentiate. But it's a partial derivative in the sense that the other variables have to be held fixed. So that's okay. So I think you'll all agree that you'll accept this equation if I can only tell you what is the physical meaning of that Lagrangian. If it's physical, then you have to accept it. You don't have any choice. Okay? If it's only mathematics, then you could say it's no concern to us. Some people in third floor should worry about it. So it is physical, and I'll tell you why. Okay. This describes motion of a free particle on a, I put curved in brackets because it may or may not be curved, but in general it's curved, space with metric Gij of x. So it looks like I'm making your life harder and harder. Now I've introduced curved space and metric Gij of x. So let's give an example. Okay. Let's assume that I have a free particle in 3 dimensions, not subject to any forces. It's free, so forget about gravity, electromagnetism and all that. However, it's constrained to move on the surface of a 2-dimensional sphere. Okay, this you can certainly imagine as a problem. It's a reasonable problem. Okay, you could even make it. But of course, if you can do a 2-dimensional sphere, you can actually push a little bit on the sphere until it's a 2-dimensional, very wobbly, shaky, kind of odd-shaped object, not a sphere, not a regular sphere, but maybe a squash sphere or a stretched sphere or something. Okay, so you can imagine constraining a particle to move on a 2-dimensional space, which is not a conventional infinite flat space, but is somehow curved. I think that's our intuition. Okay. So what I'll tell you now, and it will be formalized from the next lecture, is that for anything that we intuitively think of as a space, the correct thing which defines its property as a space is the metric Gij of x, and it's a rule which tells me how the thing is stretched or squashed at any given point on it. Okay. So metric characterizes what we intuitively mean by a space. Sometimes people say non-Euclidean space because the one space that everybody is familiar with is Euclidean space. Okay? And of course, you know what's the metric for Euclidean space. What is it? Delta Ij. One, the diagonal matrix 1, 1, 1. Okay. So Euclidean space is a special case. That's why I said I'm generalizing the Lagrangian at the top to this one. The special case where Gij is delta Ij takes me back to that Lagrangian. Okay, so that's familiar. That's the Lagrangian for a particle moving in flat space. Okay, but now I'm moving. So Euclidean is this. But now I'm allowing for more general spaces. And here a whole bunch of surprises come up and some amount of formalism is needed. We'll simply say more general spaces are when Gij of x is anything else. But it will turn out that anything else within that, there are many options. For example, it could be a constant which is not delta Ij. It's a matrix, that matrix might have any constant entries. Turns out that's not a very interesting case. It's actually equivalent to flat space by a change of coordinates. So that's not new, but we have to get used to that in this subject. There are many things which look new, but they are not really new. But then there could be other functions of Gij of x which are much more complicated, and they will be new. Okay. One thing I should say in parenthesis is that I wrote I and j go from 1 to 3, but for this discussion they can really go over any number of values. And for example I gave you of a particle constrained to a sphere, I and j will go over how many values? 1 and 2. Of course, you can also take them to go over 1, 2 and 3 and implement the constraint that it's stuck on the surface of a sphere separately. That means you have extra coordinates. Okay, but that does nothing except describe the sphere as an embedding in some bigger space. Okay, and we are in that situation where all the spheres we know of are embedded in 3-dimensional flat space. Okay. But for a mathematician, that kind of thing is not necessary. They can define a sphere without embedding it inside anything, and we have to do that also. Once you accept that, then we can have not only 2-dimensional spheres, but we could have 3-dimensional spheres. Okay, you may think 3-dimensional sphere is very easy, but it's very hard to visualize a 3-dimensional sphere. You can't embed it in this space. It's the analog of the surface of a two-dimensional sphere, but of one dimension higher. It's not the inside of a ball. That's not a three-sphere. A three-dimensional sphere is something one dimension. It's what would look like a sphere if we lived in four space dimensions. If we were in four space dimensions and said we'll consider all points at fixed distance from a single point, we'll get a three dimensions. So these are things we have to handle, and we'll do them in due course. Anyway, I hope I have convinced you that for a generic Gij, this Lagrangian describes the motion of a free particle in that space. So, in other words, we are able to study free particles not only in flat space but in any space we like. Okay, and this is the first lecture of the course. I think that's pretty good. We should be happy that classical mechanics allows us to study free particles moving in any space we like, not just flat space. All we do is, if somebody gives us the space, we go to that person and say, please can you give me the metric of that space, because that's how I know what space you're talking about. Then the person says Gij of x is equal to whatever it is. Then I plug that into this Lagrangian. I also plug it into this formula, do a little bit of differentiation and arrive at a 3-index quantity gamma. I plug that in this formula and I've got the equation of motion of the particle on that space. Okay, so this can all be done, and this doesn't require any change of point of view about physics or any new theory of general relativity, nothing. It just requires us to realize that space isn't always flat. Okay, it should be no surprise actually that space isn't always flat. Okay, all of you are sitting on something which is not flat. Okay, we encounter non-flat spaces. The problem we have is that we always think of them as embedded in flat space. And it's this crutch of always thinking of it as embedded that stops us understanding that they have their own geometry. So the analogy is always given that if you want to understand, say, the geometry of the chair you are sitting on, put an insect on it which doesn't have that ability to move in the dimension outside the chair. It will go and encounter some bends and folds and turns and so on, and the summary of its impressions, that is the intrinsic geometry of the chair, with no reference to what is outside the chair. For that insect, there is nothing outside. Okay? So here, this Lagrangian is a Lagrangian of a particle moving on some space, some manifold, which has its own intrinsic twists and curves and all that. And what are they specified by? They are specified by this 2-index object called the metric. And we are perfectly capable of studying this without any reference to any external space. So it remains only to tell you two other things and I'll end. First of all, this has a name. Does anybody know what is the name of this equation? Geodesic. Thank you. This is the geodesic equation, supposedly a fancy equation that you get when you understand space and time and all that very deeply, but at our very, very shallow level, it's nothing but the equation of motion of that Lagrangian. So it's very simple. What is it saying? It's saying that when the particle finds itself in a weird space with lot of twists and turns, it will take the trajectory which is shortest for it. It always does that. In flat space, it goes straight. In a more general space, it will locally always look for the shortest path and it will take that shortest path, in fact, because this equation is nothing but minimizing the action, principle of least action, and this is the answer. So this better be the geodesic equation. Okay? So in fact, that's exactly what it is. And the last thing I need to complete this discussion is, why is the metric called a metric? Gij is called a metric. Why is it called metric? The reason it's called the metric is because it gives us a rule to find the distance between very close by points. And this rule consists of saying that, let me imagine I have the coordinates xi and xi plus dxi. So these are my two very close by points specified in coordinates. Okay, and dxi is a small amount, so I keep that in mind. Then the distance ds, the actual distance in a manifold with a metric between these 2 points is not square root of dxi, which would be the distance in ordinary flat space, but instead is the square root of gij of x dxi dx.
So what's a manifold?
Yeah. So what I've called a space, next time by putting in a little bit of formalism, we'll call it a manifold. The point is, what we call space.
We've already used covariant contravariance.
Sorry?
We've already used notations that are covariant.
Not really. If you notice, I haven't actually. The metric is defined as a 2-index matrix, so the indices are always down. I don't raise them, and coordinate distances are defined to have the indices always up. So you want to call it covariant, contravariant, you can, but it's just part of my definition. I haven't done it. And this one, which is unusual because it's a metric with indices up, is the matrix inverse. Actually, what I'm doing here is deriving the covariant, contravariant thing, which is normally presented as a rule. There's no rule. Okay, there are certain quantities which are defined in certain ways, and the nice thing is that the way they are defined, we end up contracting indices which are lower and upper instead of upper and upper or lower and lower. I'll do all that in more detail next time. Don't worry about that aspect. What you should notice is the meaning of this formula. So first of all, is it very clear what is this formula when Gij is delta ij? It's nothing but the diagonal distance between 2 points. You just take the infinitesimal dx, square it, sum over the i's, and square root it, and that's the actual distance you measure with the ruler. Okay? But that's because your ruler is flat and you're working in a flat space. Now let's say you're on a sphere and you have to measure a distance. The first thing you notice is that you can't actually measure a distance in the sense your ruler is not curved. Of course, you can do this trick of putting a string and then straightening it. That's called a map from the sphere, local map from the sphere to flat space. We will encounter that. The important thing to realize is that for that measurement on a sphere, you need to measure every infinitesimal unit and then add it up. Okay? You don't just put a ruler and measure, you actually measure locally. And the reason is that Gij of x is not the same for every x, it's a function of x. Okay? So if I have a distance between here and here, I need to measure the distance between the first part using Gij of x, where that x is the rough average of these points. These points are very close by. Then I add to it the next little unit, but now I use Gij at the next point. Okay? So I need to use the value of Gij at every point along my trajectory to measure the length between 2 finitely separated points. That's why the formula is always given in terms of infinitesimally separated points. And if I want s a long distance, I just integrate this. Okay. But anyway, this is the rule. This is the fundamental rule. This says that the concept of distance is defined by a matrix called the metric of the space. Okay. And I'll just give you a name, a space. Okay, first of all, a space is a manifold. If I say this on the 3rd floor, all sorts of people will come after me with knives. But fundamentally, it's true. Okay, a manifold is just the set of formal mathematical definitions that we use to define what we mean by a space. Today, I haven't defined it at all. I just appealed to your idea that there could be such a thing. And I said, we'll characterize the distance on it with a metric, but first of all, what's the thing before I even characterize distance? That's a manifold that needs to be explained. We'll be doing that. Okay. A space, what was I saying here? A space with a metric is called Riemannian. So it's called a Riemannian manifold or a Riemannian space because Riemann gave us the concept of how to understand this metric. Okay. Now notice, now I'm at the end of the lecture. I have not said anything about space and space-time. There is no space-time in this lecture. Okay. Actually, for those of you who know something about space-time, we'll have to vary this word. Riemannian does not correctly describe space-time manifolds. Instead, we use the word pseudo-Riemannian. Because Riemann did not accommodate the idea of having time and space on a different footing with a different signature. So all I've done here is give you some very broad and simple picture of curved space only. Okay. The nice thing is that if you understand curved space conceptually, then it's not so hard to understand curved space-time, and curved space-time with a metric is what general relativity is all about.
So I know that you haven't introduced time in this.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't. So maybe I said that wrong. There is time, of course. This is time evolution of a particle. Okay. But it's time in the non-relativistic sense, which means that the particle has coordinates, spatial coordinates, and they are functions of time. Okay. As you know, in relativity, we can't really do that. In relativity, a particle has to be described by 4 space-time coordinates. Okay. But then its trajectory has to be defined in terms of a proper time. Okay. And then there are all kinds of invariances which make it pretty hard to analyze even in such a simple system. So that space-time, the mixing of space and time is not present in this. Here the particles are only propagating in space. Okay. But mathematically, most features of all the equations that are on the board here will translate into space-time. But before doing that, we have to motivate why are we interested in space-time. And the only part of that I have given you today is to tell you that, well, we have to reconcile Newtonian gravity with special relativity, and special relativity is certainly the theory of space-time. So space-time better come in somehow. Okay, so it's bound to come in, but how exactly it makes an appearance, that we'll see next time. Yes, question.
So here we are not only using time derivative, we are also using space derivative.
Yeah, but in a, yes, correct.
In Cart's space,
Yes.
is the ordinary derivative with respect to the space coordinate using here. We are using here.
Yeah. This is curved space and I'm using an ordinary derivative. Now, ordinary derivative is always possible to take. Question is that what kind of meaning does it have? That we'll have to see next time. Probably you're thinking of the fact that when I take an ordinary derivative, I don't get a tensor, but I haven't even told you what's a tensor. Okay, but you're right, you don't get a tensor. That's why this thing is not a tensor. Okay. However, it so happens that this isn't a tensor either. So both terms of the equation are not tensor, but the equation is flowing a different. This is all for only for people who know what we are going to do next time, but for the rest of you, you will see it as it happens. Okay, any questions? Today I'll end now. I have any questions first?
Class schedule?
So class schedule, as far as I understand now, is Tuesdays 2 p.m. and Thursdays 4 p.m. Is that okay for everybody? Okay. However, the new thing is I have not bargained for this new lecture room, so I don't know that it's free on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. But I'll do my best. If it's booked on Tuesdays at 2 p.m., then I don't know what to do. Anyway, I'll advise you to watch the notice board. Just temporarily, because soon I'll put up the website, I think by this weekend, and thereafter you can watch the website and you don't have to watch. Okay? Okay, thank you. Yeah. As far as I know, there was a red button to press. Shall I try pressing that?